Today on the show, you're asking the tough questions, and we're giving the tough answers.
Oh, tough answers.
Only tough people allowed today.
Prove you're tough right now. Listener, prove you're tough. Prove it.
Throw a giant discus.
Throw a sock butt. I think that's a thing. Olympics.
I better see you leap over this bar.
Jump it. It's really high.
It's a mailbag.
Welcome to Gom Jabbar, your guide to the iconic world of Dune. We'll be exploring the themes, philosophies, and characters found in the sandy depths of this vast universe, from Frank Herbert's groundbreaking novels to the adaptations on film and TV. My name is Leo.
And my name's Abu.
Oh, and I'm back from vacation, and it's mailbag time, folks. Thank you! Yeah, man, feels good. Feels good. I mean, not that we stopped working. I responded to like 30 emails over the break. But
yeah, totally.
It's fine. It's a good time.
It's a good time.
Europe's great.
Welcome back
Thank
to
you.
iced coffee and air conditioning, which you can only get in America.
It's true.
Nowhere in Europe.
It's true. It's a fair exchange for quality food and like comfortable pace of life. Yeah, well, we're back. We are back into production, and today is a public mailbag, folks. So
yes,
we've, across all of our many new listeners over the past couple of months, we've got some great questions, some thoughts, a poem.
Yeah.
Really,
oh my goodness,
excellent stuff. And we're going to talk about that stuff today, answer some of your questions.
That's right. Now, before we get into it, a bit of housekeeping. Today's conversation will contain spoilers up through God Emperor of Dune.
Yeah.
Luckily for you, we have completed the entirety of God Emperor of Dune chapter by chapter in our book club episodes. So,
yeah,
if you haven't read the book and if you haven't listened to those episodes, go do that first and then come back and listen.
Yeah, go do it. They're good books.
It was a good time.
Really good.
Yeah.
And of course, as always, a huge shout out to our Kwisatz Haderach level patrons, Daniel Dion, Rob Silver, Roman Caballo, Jonathan Lambert, and C.R. Spruill. Gentlemen, even as I traveled the world, even as I was at distant shores in a lake in Switzerland, the thought of you and your generosity never strayed far from mine.
That's right.
Went underwater for a second and came up and went, oh my God, our Kwisatz Haderach patrons are so kind, so generous. And the Swiss people next to me were like, what is he muttering about? Yeah, it was great. Of course, our thank you extends to all of our patrons and all of our listeners. If you are a supporter of Patreon, what you contribute makes what we do possible. And honestly, if you're not able to be a patron right now, we got a few messages of people saying, can't do it right now, it's not in the budget. Hey, we appreciate you listening, even if you're just listening.
Yeah, oh my gosh, of course.
Spreading the word, telling a friend or a family member about this podcast you enjoy is worth its weight in gold. Worth its weight in
infects
space.
them with the Dune virus.
Yeah. I think we're far enough from the corona, like the height of the corona pandemic, that you can say infect other people without it being like...
Epidemic jokes are cool again.
Yeah. I do feel like we're almost not there yet, though.
Yeah, there is a bit of a summer resurgence happening. So
okay. Well, infect them with positive vibes only. If you're feeling bad, wear a mask.
All right, with the housekeeping out of the way.
Yeah.
Here's the game plan for today's mailbag episodes. Pretty straightforward. You sent us questions via email or Discord or carrier pigeon, and we are going to be opening up those questions today and responding to them.
Indeed we are.
Now, a quick reminder, if your question didn't make it into today's episode, we only have so much time. We'd love for these episodes to be 6 hours and to respond to every single email, but we simply don't have the time. Don't you worry. Continue to email us and reach out to us, DM us, Discord us. We do mailbag episodes like this regularly throughout the calendar year, so maybe we'll get you in the next one.
Indeed we will. Well, before we get to our first messages, let's take a quick little break, and then when we're back, we're going to be looking at some lore questions.
Welcome back, folks. All right, let's crack open these messages and respond to some listener mail. Starting today with an email from Caitlin Davison.
Mm-hmm.
Caitlin wrote, quote, Maybe this tension is supposed to be here for the reader and there is no real answer. But I am having trouble understanding if Paul's visions are truly a supernatural/spiritual thing for him, or if they are just purely from a combination of the Bene Gesserit breeding/training, Mentat training, and Melange intake. I have heard the Mentat computing abilities explained as a level of thinking and probability computing that allows them to predict the future in the sense that they can predict based off of probability. Is this the case for Paul? If so, how does this make sense when he loses his physical vision in Dune Messiah, yet can still see what is happening around him? Sorry if this is basic level stuff, but I'm struggling to make sense of it and would appreciate any insight. End quote.
Oh, Caitlin, never.
Oh my gosh.
Never apologize for a great question. Never. It's not tough. You want to be
Unless
tough.
you knock over a child, then you should really
You
apologize.
should apologize if you do that. Yeah, this stuff is dense. And Frank does not lay out super hard and fast rules. He often even sometimes breaks his own rules at times. And there's a lot of room for interpretation. So we appreciate you asking the question, and we're always happy to revisit things like this.
Definitely.
I'll also say, Paul is the first prescient being in the universe. So we, along with Paul, are discovering Paul's powers right along with him.
Yep.
This is uncharted territory for everyone in the universe, even Paul.
Yep.
And no one really knows its limits, what it can do, what it can't do. And then we get fucking Alia, we get Leto and Ganima, we get these other characters, these other Atreides characters coming along with other powers that also are not super well explained.
Yeah.
What are Alia's powers? Who the fuck knows? Not prescience, but can she leave messages in the future? Apparently. So your confusion, totally warranted.
Yeah.
Let's talk for a second about Paul's abilities.
Right. And to get right into it, we want to be clear. Paul's Mentat training and Paul's Mentat abilities certainly do help him sort through his visions.
Yeah.
He is constantly overwhelmed with the amount of information he's getting from his visions. His Mentat training plays a huge role in sifting and organizing all of that into something that's cohesive and understandable.
Right. Yeah.
But his prescience is much, much, much more than simple Mentat calculations that somebody like Thufir or Piter, who are very talented, experienced, veteran, and renowned Mentats in their own right, Paul is doing way more than even they can.
Right.
It's not the same as Mentat computations, and it's not simply Mentat computations.
Right. Yeah.
Paul's Mentat skills just help him handle the prescient visions.
Right.
Now, what's happening in Paul's mind is that he is seeing these infinite variations and visions of possible futures. Much like Guild's navigators do, but again, he's doing this at such a higher level than anyone else in the universe has ever been able to do.
Right.
So Paul's visions aren't some sort of like magical thing, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
They are explicitly a result of generations of genetic breeding by the Bene Gesserit to be able to get to the end result of a Kwisatz Haderach who has these abilities.
Right.
It's science and biology. It's not magic in the sense that we would think of magic in a fantasy story, for example.
Right. He's not casting a spell.
Right.
And in fact, the Dune Encyclopedia, we talked about this at some point, has a whole section on like T cells
Yes.
and the Kurlikkerkrampst section of the brain. My favorite of the Krampses, which explains the biological foundation of future and present sensitivity.
Yes, exactly.
So he does have this ability that we might see as like supernatural because we don't know this much about biology, but there is a biological explanation for it.
Right.
Whether or not it makes sense to us in 2024.
Completely. And of course, a big factor in all of this is the spice melange. It's the catalyst that triggers a lot of Paul's visions, and then ultimately his spice coma later in the book is what truly unlocks his full Kwisatz Haderach abilities.
Right.
So, yeah, you could say like, okay, spice is kind of this like magical fake thing that Frank came up with, But again, in universe, spice is a natural substance, and we are given in-lore explanations for its existence and what it does to the human body. So again, it is science and biology, and there are, of course, real-world analogies that we can make. This is not so outside of our own human understanding. Drugs that can open the mind or tap into parts of our consciousness that we normally can't are very much a real thing.
Yeah.
That people use even today.
Like ayahuasca or psilocybin, right? Things Completely. that people will say like, yeah, it changes your brain chemistry or whatever. I don't know a ton about it because a lot of that science was foregone when it was like labeled felony drugs in the fucking 70s and 80s. Thanks, was it Reagan? I don't know. Nixon?
Reagan war on drugs, baby.
So again, we don't know a ton about it, but hey, maybe in 100 years, we will discover the Kurlikakramst section of the brain, and this far-flung sci-fi fantasy thing won't seem so crazy and won't seem wild.
Yeah.
I think that's the key point here. Mm-hmm. Does Paul have supernatural abilities? For all intents and purposes, we could say yes, but only because we're conceding that the biological knowledge that Frank is saying the Bene Gesserit have is so far beyond what we currently have today that it may as well be magic.
Yeah.
But it is not witchcraft. This is not like a spell he's casting. This is not some My Hero Academia quirk. This is not a mutant gene from X-Men or whatever. This is something that is biologically rooted and was bred for specifically, and also has very clear mechanical limitations.
Yeah.
If time and space are one fabric, Paul is simply seeing it differently than we do normally, which also leads to the incredible things with like the tarot decks, right? In Dune Messiah, where even before he loses his vision, he's seeing the future and it's getting muddy and shitty because people are playing with decks that actually do give you a little glimpse of the future. That's so cool. And that's not the spell being fucked with by other spells. This is a phenomena that Frank is asking us to kind of understand as a physical thing, not magic.
Yeah, absolutely. And to get to the part of Caitlin's question about Paul and Messiah and his blindness, given what we know up to this point, it is very cool to think about what he's doing there. Once he loses his physical vision, the way he's quote-unquote seeing the world around him is amazing.
Right.
He's literally tapping into his prescience at all times. He's no longer turning that off. He has it on at all times.
Yeah.
And he's looking at the next couple of seconds or even the next couple of minutes of what his prescience shows him. He's using his mentat computations to sift through all of those futures and lock into one that he wants to commit to. And that is how he is seeing, quote unquote, what's around him, because his prescience is showing him exactly what's happening in the world 1 second ahead of right now. And the way he's able to do incredible things like fly an ornithopter is because, once again, he is being fed a script by his prescience, and all he has to do is follow the script beat for beat to make sure that the play that's happening in his mind of prescience, the future that he wants to build, will play out exactly how he wants it to.
Right.
The script says, 1 second from now, Paul Atreides veers slightly to the left so the ornithopter doesn't crash. That's what he does in reality.
Paul ignores the screaming of the other passengers. So he does. It's very simple.
So he does. Right. Paul turns to his left and brushes a tear from Stilgar's eye.
Yeah.
Sure. He's literally just following the instructions of his prescience because he can see 1 second ahead of where he is right now.
Yeah.
It's really incredible stuff and will be a very interesting visual challenge, I think, for Villeneuve to show us in the Messiah film. I'm very excited to see how that will be adapted and how that part of his blindness will be shown on screen. Because if it's done well, wow, it's gonna be dope.
Yeah, I'm so excited.
Yeah.
Well, Caitlin, what a great question. Hope that helps a little bit. Again, it's kind of supernatural, but it's not. So there you have it. So simple, so clean, right? Dune, confusing as fuck. Thanks for writing in, Caitlin. We appreciate it.
We do.
Our next message comes from Ryan Vanneman about an interesting alternate timeline theory about Villeneuve's films. Quote, "Do you think this theory has any legs? I know you guys think Denis has a high-level understanding of the source material. Do you think this might be an intentional choice to justify the changes Denis has made to the story in order to make it more easily digestible to the audience?" End quote. And what a good question.
Yeah.
That does require a bit of explanation.
Right. We got to explain the theory that he's talking about here.
I hadn't seen... Have you seen this theory?
I saw it on Reddit and stuff, but, we'll get into our thoughts about it. But
we really probably should have talked about it at some point during our Dune Part 2 coverage.
Yeah.
So thank you, Ryan, for the opportunity to open this can of worms. Let's summarize quickly what the theory is.
Right.
And as far as I can tell, this was posted by Reddit user Munch ASMR, fantastic username, who posted to the Dune subreddit a long breakdown explaining, like a message from a friend, basically, how the events in Villeneuve's Dune Part 2, beginning with Paul when he consults Jameis after he walks away from the crew. It's right before they go south. That tearful moment where he goes, "I'm going to go south and I'm going to do whatever I have to."
Yes.
Is an alternative timeline to the books.
Right. A branching off of the story from there forward.
Yes. Yeah. That moment forward is a branching timeline. Now, in this theory, Paul, seeing the many ways that things can shake out, he chooses to trigger the events 2 years early to avoid the events of the book that lead to Chani's death at the end of Dune Messiah. So he is seeing the events of Dune and Dune Messiah and choosing an alternative to that, which in turn explains some of the differences in events, like, for instance, him being stabbed by Fade during their final fight, which is something that doesn't happen in the book. Also, recall the vision of him in the golden armor flipping and turning and facing the camera.
Yeah.
We see that moment is Chani. So the visions have changed.
Right.
The reality is not matching with these previous visions that he had seen. And him being stabbed by Fade makes a certain sense if he didn't have 2 additional years of fighting with Fremen and becoming a better actual combatant. This is a younger Paul who doesn't have the same experience that Paul in the book had. This also explains why their relationship is not as developed. This is not a couple who has been together for years, had a child together, lost that child, and are now facing this tumult of the universe being upended. This is a much younger couple, so it's much easier for Chani to walk away from him.
Yeah.
Now, interestingly, there is support. So at this point, you're reading the theory, you're going, okay, this feels really far-fetched. This feels pretty ridiculous. But there is a passage in the first Dune book, so this is prime canon, where Paul is having his visions in the tent with his mother, and here's the quote. Quote, "He had seen 2 main branchings along the way ahead. In one, he confronted an evil old baron and said, 'Hello, grandfather.' The thought of that path and what lay along it sickened him." End quote. It's like he saw 2 main branching pathways, one a film adaptation, the other a book series from the 1960s. Yeah. And sure enough, in Dune Part 2, Paul confronts Baron. It's not 2 years later. Alia isn't born and doesn't do it herself. Paul confronts Baron, says grandfather. So this is not word for word from the book, but it does seem a little conspicuous, before killing him. And he, as part of this plan 2 years early, had to become Harkonnen.
Right.
As he says after he awakes from the spice coma.
Yeah.
Imagine young Paul Atreides. He's in the tent with his mother, and he sees a vision of becoming a Harkonnen. Yeah. We can imagine that would sicken Paul. That would sicken him. So there it is. You are now caught up, dear listener, with this interesting alternate timeline explanation. What do we think, Abu? Do you think this is a tinfoil hat theory? Or do you think Denis Villeneuve has been playing 5D chess this whole time with his deep lore understanding?
Yeah. And, I suppose that's the question with the theory that's posed and with the support from the book. Is Denny taking liberties and going down an alternate branching path in one of Paul's visions with his story, which would give him leeway to do whatever he wants.
Yeah.
Because now we're in a completely alternate path that is separate from the events of the book. It's an interesting theory, and I think what's fun is that there is such clear evidence that supports the potential alternate path in the book itself.
Yeah.
One where he confronts the Baron himself, hello, grandfather, and then kills him. Obviously, that's exactly what we see happen in the movie. I'm not sure that Denny is actually going down that route, though. Maybe he took some inspiration from that passage for what we see in the movie, but I don't think he is committing to some sort of alternate timeline of Dune story in his movies.
Yeah.
At least not in a way that I think will fundamentally change Messiah. I think we will, for the most part, see a fairly accurate adaptation of Messiah as well. And basically my reason for thinking this is because we have already seen a very accurate adaptation of the first book from Dune Part 1 and Part 2.
True.
You know, all things considered. Of course, there's 1,000 things to nitpick, all of which we've nitpicked over 7 hours of episodes.
It's an alternate timeline with no dinner banquet. What does it mean? They didn't have dinner.
What did it mean? Who knows?
They're
what does
so
it mean?
hungry.
Right, but the reality is like they did film a dinner banquet and then it got cut on the left on the cutting room floor.
Or was it an alternative time?
Exactly. So it starts to lean a little bit too into tinfoil hat territory for me, and I think it's pretty clear that Denis Villeneuve loves this story.
Yeah,
he loves Dune by Frank Herbert, and he is doing his best to translate it to the big screen. These series of movies are his love letter to Dune, to a story, a sci-fi story that has inspired him and has meant so much to him for decades. I don't think he would be so bold as to say, I can tell a different and better story than Frank Herbert, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go down a totally alternate path. Yeah.
I also think like maybe this is coming out of the very reasonable question of, are we going to do a time skip? No, we're not. We're not going to do 2 years in the desert. Ali is not going to be born.
Yeah.
So what would happen if it happened a little earlier? And just answering those questions in a practical sense.
Yeah.
That kind of would lend credence to, maybe that other vision that Paul had, maybe that's closer to what's happening. Without having to change everything, maybe you're just going, there would be these differences. And then putting those differences on the screen. Because that's going to contribute to a cohesive series of events that follow logical sense.
Yeah.
Rather than like, I don't know, committing to, changing everything and being like, I'm going to tell a better Act 3 than Frank wrote in his iconic book series that everyone loves.
Yeah. And look, there will be changes in the Messiah movie, I don't think anyone is thinking we are going to get a 1-for-1 adaptation of the Messiah book in the third movie. There have to be changes.
It would be really
funny.
There
will be. It's an adaptation.
It'd be so funny if they weren't, though. If the first scene is Paul coming back and they're just together and the audience is like, what the fuck?
Yeah. Well, the first scene should technically be our boy Bronzo of Ix.
Bronzo of Ix! I can't believe I fucking forgot.
Prologue.
Well, it depends on which version of the book he's adapting, right?
That's true. So inevitably, it's an adaptation. There will be changes that make sense to keep the movies cohesive. Yeah. But I do not think Denny is leaning into any sort of, this is a totally alternate timeline. I can do whatever I want now.
Yeah,
I don't think that's what's happening here. This theory, just as a quick aside, it's funny to read this theory from Dune fans because it reminds me of the indoctrination theory that became really popular among Mass Effect fans like a decade plus ago when Mass Effect 3 came out and had that really awful shitty ending before they kind of patched things up with DLC and extra story.
Yeah.
I myself, as a huge Mass Effect fan, was absolutely livid with the ending of Mass Effect 3. Utterly disappointed, hated it in every way. And I really latched onto this indoctrination theory back when I was a kid. It's this fun theory about what potentially happened to Commander Shepard at the end of that story and why the ending was like so flat. But ultimately, the developers came out, said that this wasn't the case, the theory wasn't true. Early on in brainstorming sessions for Mass Effect 3 and the story, they toyed with the idea of indoctrination, but then ultimately trashed it. And so like anything you might be seeing might just be like residual effects of those early brainstorms, but not the intention.
Right.
It just was a theory that fans came up with. It came from fan desire to sort of make sense of something that was deeply unpopular at the time, and to make sense of a conclusion to a story that a lot of folks were deeply attached to, myself included. And again, when I was a kid, I was super into this indoctrination theory. I loved it. It was so cool. Parts of it really made sense, and I really wanted it to be true. But of course, at the end of the day, it was just a way to sort of cope and fantasize about a different ending to a story after I was disappointed with what I got. So I bring that up because ultimately, this Dune theory does, I'm sure, help some people cope with some of the changes, right?
Yeah.
Chani is different in this movie. Why is there no Alia? If it helps you watch these movies and enjoy them more, thinking of it as an alternate timeline, sure, go for it. The indoctrination theory certainly helped me revisit and enjoy Mass Effect 3 so much more. And it's still one of my all-time favorite games. So it just kind of reminded me of that. To wrap up my sort of meandering here, I see in your notes here in our script that you like this theory a lot, but basically don't want it to be true, and I'm in the same boat. I wouldn't want Denis Villeneuve to do this. I don't want this theory, alternate timeline theory, to be true. Messiah, as I've said many times, is my favorite book in the Dune saga. I can't wait to see it translated to the silver screen by Denis Villeneuve's very capable hands.
Yeah.
And I have no interest in watching some alternate timeline story. If we do get that, I would be crushed in so many ways. But I am doubtful that that's the direction we're going.
Yeah. So to be clear, I think we're aligned in saying, let's say alternate timeline theory is just what I was saying earlier, that they had to sit down and go, how are we going to make this work without 2 years on the planet, right? Paul's approach at the Cave of Birds is not some fun choreographed thing with Stilgar, because they haven't had the time to build that rapport. This is going to be a lot harder, faster. He's going to have to shout them down and force of will it. So maybe this is going to be the same beats, but just handling the practical differences of he hasn't had 2 years in the desert, so we had to make some changes. That's fine. I think we're both fine with there have to be changes to make the medium work for the film, and a different timeline, a different literal scale of how many days Paul has been on Arrakis is part of that.
Yeah.
That being said, my hope is that we don't get too many of the beats, the major beats of Dune Messiah, that we don't lose those, because Dune Messiah is such a good book. It's don't fuck with perfect, right? If it's already a great book, just don't change too much of it. So I was thinking as I was writing my response to this, it would be interesting to see Paul has chosen to trigger events 2 years early as a hope to avoid Chani dying. That's part of this theory that they wrote out.
Right.
It would be interesting to see Chani still dying and to see the major events of Dune Messiah still happening as a further reflection on the fact that Paul can't really change very much.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this is a very fun concept, though. I think it's over almost 200 episodes. I think I've made it very clear. I love tinfoil hat theories. I love stretching things and connecting dots. I like being Charlie Day at the wall when I'm like, there's no Susan.
With the red strings.
Whatever.
Yep.
I think it's so much fun. I do not think that if this was a prime part of Denis Villeneuve's strategy in adapting these books, I don't think we would hear of it first as a comment on Reddit. It just doesn't seem likely. This feels like something Patrice Vermette would have said in an interview. That's something that Denis Villeneuve would have said in an interview.
Yeah.
And like you said, I just don't want him to change too much about Dune Messiah. So I'm hoping, as much as I love Chani desperately, I think she's a great character, I do hope that the broad beats of Dune Messiah are intact. I'm giving this an overall likelihood of less than 10% being the case. But huge props to whoever crafted this tinfoil hat.
You heard it here first, folks. Calling the election, Leo Wiggins.
Calling the election, yeah. The election of scripting, movie plotting. But huge props to whoever put this theory together. Super cool.
Yeah.
I love it. I think it's super fun.
I think we do have a framework. Have you played the new Final Fantasy VII remakes?
I played the first one, and I started Rebirth, but I haven't gotten very far.
Right. I haven't started Rebirth yet because I'm waiting for a sale. That shit never goes on sale, so I'll be waiting for 10 years.
Yeah.
But we do have a framework for a story that is not really an adaptation, but like an evolution and an alternate timeline, like that is basically what Rebirth and Remake are doing, right? It is not Final Fantasy VII.
They're remaking it. It's not a remaster. It's not like a fun graphical update. They've changed.
Yeah, they've changed. But that change, it started off subtle. At the beginning of the game, you think you're just replaying Final Fantasy VII with better graphics and modern gameplay. But then it very much, the ghost things start showing up, and then it very much becomes clear that, like, no, this is an alternate timeline where things are dramatically shifting.
Yeah.
And I think if that were the case with Denis Villeneuve's adaptations, it would be more explicit. I don't think it would be so subtle that you have to know one line from the Dune books to understand what Denis Villeneuve is doing. Yeah. I think like the Final Fantasy games, it would be much more explicit that, like, we're taking this in a different direction. Hope you're along for the ride.
Yeah, because otherwise people would just be frustrated that it's not the story they expected. I think you would signal early on, like, this is not going to be what you expect. Did you see Snowpiercer?
Oh gosh, like 15 years ago. Yeah, a long time ago. I watched it.
There's a really great video essay on YouTube about how Snowpiercer is a canonical sequel to Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. And it's fucking spectacular. So again, for theory crafting fans out there, for people who love tinfoil hat theories, go look up Snowpiercer as a sequel to Willy Wonka.
Incredible.
Similar to like Mass Effect and I think this theory, it's just not the case. But
right.
Man,
but it's fun.
It's fun. And actually, as much as you're thinking, oh, that would be kind of funny, there's a lot of evidence. It's so crazy.
Yeah.
But it's a lot of fun. So anyway, we'll wrap up our response there.
Right.
Thank you again, Ryan, for such a good question.
Yeah.
I had not seen that theory, so I really enjoyed reading it and thinking about it, wrestling with it. And we'll have to see. We'll just see after Dune Messiah comes out. Maybe Villeneuve will pop a streamer and go, fucking surprise, nerds. Different timeline this whole time.
Right. Yeah, maybe we'll eat our words. We'll have to see.
We'll see.
Thank you so much for the great question, Ryan. Okay, moving on. Next up, we have an email from Desiree, which I think could open up a bit of a fun conversation here. Desiree wrote about the rules of a fictional universe and how much they're allowed to bend and break before we stop following along.
Sure.
Here's just a snippet of the very long email. Quote, Leto, my skin is not my own Atreides 2 starts fusing with glorified sand amoebas. Ugh, I must have reread that section 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
This was a total record scratch moment for me. This felt like a sharp left turn. I'm reading fiction, of course. I'm not expecting faithfulness to reality, but this moment made clear that I do expect to understand the boundaries of a fictional universe. And I thought I did. But this metamorphosis raised questions about the boundaries of the Duneverse. Unlike my friend, that feeling hasn't alienated me. There's so much to love and appreciate about this world, I'm still firmly on this ride. In the hands of a less thoughtful and capable writer, poorly defined boundaries could open the door to all kinds of plot conveniences, aka lazy writing. Yeah. I'm not worried about that right now. But I do wonder what else is possible, how the story will be shaped by these events, and what other Dune heads make of it. Is the right reaction here to be like, it's Dune, baby! We're in one big spice trance now! Just let it happen! Or are there points of view that see this wormy metamorphosis as a very logical continuation of building upon what we already know about the material facts of this world? End quote.
Oh
my
excellent
goodness.
Question, and what a fun journey to join you on, because same. I reread that page like 2 or 3 times just thinking, oh, I must have missed something, like that's not what.
Unreal. That I will never forget reading that metamorphosis chapter for the first time and being so confused. To give this email a little extra context, because this was only one paragraph of a really beautiful, lengthy email, Desiree was explaining that her friend basically told her not to read the sequels. Because the sequels get too weird, they get too horny, it loses its focus. Desiree, of course, clearly made it at least up through God Emperor of Dune.
Yeah.
And mentioned in the email that she's been reading along with our book club series, which we love to hear.
Desiree, if your friend is listening, boo them.
And tell them to read the sequels with our book clubs.
We make it make sense.
Because we'll help it make more sense.
Yeah, for sure. It's fun.
Now, here's the thing, though. To really address Desiree's last point in that email, there is no right reaction to something as wild as Leto's worm transformation, right?
Yeah.
Whatever reaction you had to that is totally valid. If it gave you the ick, cool. If you leaned into the weird, cool. If it turned you on, sure, cool.
Yeah, it's that classic overplayed trope of young boy to giant sandworm, metamorphosis.
Yeah.
It's
right. Rom-coms everywhere got that.
It happens like 6 times in Friends. I mean, it's all over the place.
Colleen Hoover can't help herself. Every story.
They're like, Phoebe. She's like, I'm sorry.
So I do want to address that part. There is no right reaction here.
Sure.
And Desiree being like, what's the right reaction? Whatever you felt, Desiree, totally valid.
Totally, yeah.
It didn't alienate you, but something like a worm transformation clearly alienated your friend and was too weird for them. Totally fair.
Yeah.
But I think what's interesting is Desiree's email does open up this fascinating conversation about the bounds of a fictional universe.
Yeah,
How much can you bend and push and break before a reader goes, okay, that's enough for me. I can no longer accept where this story is going. We are beyond what I thought was happening in this universe.
I've got a Brian Herbert book in the background that I think pretty well drew that line in the sand for me. A couple of times I was like, wow, not going there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really interesting consideration. I think for me, my opinion on all of this goes to the author's intentions. And in that moment, Frank is intending to show us how bold and chaotic and almost like on a whim, it's almost haphazard, Leto going out into the night and doing it. He doesn't go, I have this plan and this is what I'm going to do and this is how I'm going to do it. He's kind of just out there by the Quinat and he's like, I'm going to grab a sandworm, and then the shit gets crazy, right? I think, to your point, Desiree, the idea that like a less capable writer might Brian might have things happen where you go, that just doesn't feel like I'm reading the same book anymore. But Leto, those chapters leading up to that moment are so weird and surreal. But I kind of came away from that moment thinking, however I'm feeling was within Frank's wheelhouse of what he intended me to feel, right?
Yeah.
It felt like he knew what he was showing us, and then he showed us, and you have the effect that it has on you. Mm-hmm. That moment, as shocking and as sudden as it feels, is intentionally out of nowhere and guides us very chaotically into the last chunk of that book. So I do think that for myself, author's intention and kind of what the artist is attempting to do plays a part. Because there are plenty of times that authors have like written something that's rubbed me super the wrong way, and then they just carry on as if they didn't just say something fucking out of pocket. And I'm like, no, I'm not engaged anymore. So for myself, I think part of that is the author's awareness of what they're writing and how their writing is going to affect people. Mm-hmm. But that was just my experience. Kind of, what do you think about all this, Abu?
I agree. I mean, clearly I've read the whole Dune saga, and so it didn't alienate me and turn me off from the books. Uh-huh. And in fact, I actually think it makes a lot of sense for this weird metamorphosis to happen.
Yeah.
It's certainly shocking, as you've said.
For sure, yeah.
But consider the universe Frank has been creating in the books this whole time. It is a world where humans are constantly pushing the limits of what they can biologically do. We just talked about this, actually, with our response to Caitlin's question earlier. Pushing the limits of genetics and biology to create the Kwisatz Haderach, someone who can see the future.
Yeah, true.
Frank has actually kind of built this universe where it's anti-technology because of the Butlerian Jihad. Technology has disappeared in many ways, and so humanity has been forced to find biological answers to everyday problems like space travel and computing. That's how we get spicy fishmen like guild navigators who can see into the future and guide a spaceship.
What up, Edric? Yep.
Or how we get, huge four-eyed nerds like mentats who can compute data faster than my MacBook can. The Bene Gesserit are also kind of doing this as well, like pushing the limits of the body.
Yeah, true.
And physical control through Prana Bindu in the weirding way.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's out of the bounds of this fictional universe that Frank has created for Leto to then transform himself biologically into part sandworm, part human.
Right.
It's certainly weird, but Frank has already created a really weird-ass universe.
Yeah.
So this is just one more shocking thing to happen within a universe where a lot of weird, shocking things already happen. It never felt to me like it was something that was totally improbable or that it was convenient or lazy writing.
Yeah, yeah.
To shock the reader or to ham-fist a twist in there that no one expected. I think it's quite in line with a lot of the universe that's already here. I mean, look at everything the fucking Tleilaxu are up to.
Yeah.
That's gross and biological, and they're tampering with genetics and human engineering. Leto transforming into a worm is just an extension of that idea, I think, that already exists.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, I think we agree. It seems like it's kind of an intentional thing from Frank, and it does feel like a natural thing within his universe of chair dogs and just sligs and all sorts of weird shit.
Can you think of an example where a story pushed the bounds of its own universe too much for you, and you were like, "Nope, I'm out now"? I'm racking my brain.
I think of conveniences and sort of lazy writing as being the like. I always felt this might be a little bit of a hot take. I'm sorry, Harry Potter fans.
Let's fucking go.
I know, but listen, the fact that Horcruxes were not mentioned explicitly until pretty late in the Harry Potter books always rubbed me the wrong way.
Yeah.
Because as intentional as J.K. was with so much of her universe, with so much of, like Albus Dumbledore and Sirius Black and Rubeus Hagrid are all named after the colors that go into the Philosopher's Stone, and then that's the thing. Those are all his father figures, Harry's father figures, and he's there's a lot of planning that she put into that universe. It does feel like a sort of Deus Ex Machina where it comes up in the story to me. And that's how I always, like, when I got to that point in the book where they're like, and that thing from the first book, that was a thing. That was a thing that you didn't know about. And you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of would have liked that mentioned.
I agree.
So there are things like that make me feel like, this feels a little thrown together. I don't know. Maybe though.
Yeah. The most recent example I can think of, I've been reading The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang, and TikTok loves this book, and I was convinced that I would love it too. But I'm actually like a little over halfway through and probably not going to finish.
Whoa.
Because I loved the first half of the book, and then it just like flips its own premise so much that it's becoming hard for me to believe and commit to the story. Like, the basic premise is that this poor orphaned girl studies hard and tests into basically the West Point of this universe. It's a very militaristic country that she's in, and she tests into the best school, into the best program, and finally opens up a path for her life forward to break out of poverty and to break away from her not exactly abusive like foster parents, but like just shitty foster parents.
Yeah.
And I was like, cool, I'm sold. I love a like little magical school moment where like your life changes forever. She goes to the school, she makes friends. Parts of it are very like Harry Potter-ish, which I was fine with. I was really sold on it. They're training really hard. She's doing well in classes. One of her teachers is really quirky and teaching her that she has the ability to commune with gods, and it's super rare. No one believes in the gods anymore. The whole country is very
cool, sort
of atheist at this point. Like, religion has died off over the years, and it's all just myths and legends now.
Yeah.
That's cool. And she's learning to commune with the gods under the tutelage of this like weird, cool ass professor. That's all very cool. And then a war breaks out halfway through the book, and she gets enlisted in an entire squad of shamans who can talk to gods and have been able to this whole time.
Oh. And it's not like a secret unit or something
and
like
it's
that?
not a secret unit or anything.
Yeah, that
it's
feels
just
weird.
a part of the military. And I'm like, how do people not believe in gods when there's a fucking military? Like, there's
it's like
a SEAL Team 6
title in the military.
Yeah, and like, sure, you can say like this is a Black Ops unit. They're top secret in the military, but like, I don't know. I know about SEAL Team 6. I know like special units exist in the military.
Yeah.
I don't know everything that they're doing, sure, but if reports came out that this special unit's soldier tapped into the Phoenix God and set the whole battlefield aflame, yeah, man, like that's gonna get out there.
I think that would challenge my atheism. Like
that would challenge my atheism.
I'm like, I think there's a field of flames as counter evidence to there not being gods. Interesting.
Yeah. So I'm actually like having a really I'm getting long-winded here. That's the part where I'm having trouble with. Yeah. I've been told this whole book that shamans are no longer around. Nobody believes in gods. It's very rare that this girl can commune with the gods. And then she's suddenly in a squad of like 12 other people who all just casually commune with gods. And so like, what was the point of telling me it was rare and special? It doesn't seem rare and special. Like these people are just doing it constantly.
Yeah.
That for me is an example of like the premise you set up and the boundaries of the fictional universe you were telling me suddenly don't matter. And I'm like less along for the ride now because it's less cool now.
You just reminded me of a thing that made me bail on a fucking sci-fi series. Remember C, the Apple TV Plus original television show with Jason Momoa?
Yeah, starring Jason Momoa.
What a trash show. And I bailed because it's the premise, right? All of humanity loses vision. Many people die. Thousands of years have passed. At this point, humanity's forgotten that anyone could ever see. Like no one never could.
Okay.
And
very cool premise.
And so like you go into these like roaming tribes who have these methods for getting around of like ropes on trees and different things like that. And so you're seeing all of these like, okay, what would human society look like if every human lost the ability to see? What would that look like 10,000 years from now? It's a very interesting premise. And they start it with just a single like expositional thing. This is what happened, and then they bring you into the world. We're in the world for like 10 minutes, and then they're in their little like camp, and they get some like alarm things that are like someone tripped a rope that like makes things jingle. I might be misremembering for anybody who's a huge fan of this weird series, but point is someone goes, oh, get one of the like sensors over here, and there's a guy who's like, I sense murderous intent from the people at the base of the mountain.
Okay.
And they're like, oh no, so they're bad people. We're going to have to fight them. So they like set up these defenses that they're going to use against these people. And I'm like, I'm sorry, what the fuck? Are there superpowers?
Sensing?
Yeah.
Right.
You have an empath who can like read intentions from 200 miles? Like, what the fuck? And the thing that really bothered me was you could have said in that opening just paragraph, this happened. And the thing that caused everyone to lose their vision also began a process of genetic, changes.
Right. Adaptation.
And people can do things now. And I would have been fine with it.
Right.
But because they failed, kind of to your point, of setting my expectations, they say, oh my God, someone hasn't been able to speak to gods for 3,000 years. Go join the crew of people who talk to gods. And you're like...
exclusively talk to gods.
Oh
my God. I mean, what's crazy is the empress of this nation talks to gods. And I'm like, who doesn't talk to gods anymore then? What do we do?
Yeah. He's like, I'm an atheist,
exactly.
But the janitor talks to gods all the time.
Yeah. Anyway. I mean, I have so many thoughts.
Anyway,
so, a cool premise is cool, and you're allowed to shake it up and break your own premise, but like you can't do it in like a lame, convenient way that just makes their original premise. Like, I was super into the C pitch until you said that. Until you explained that they have quirks, basically. My hero quirks.
Yeah. And again, maybe it works out being fine, but like, I want to understand the stakes. And if you say, no one can see, I'm actively grappling with that premise along with the characters as they're going through this thing. And you say, oh my God, there are people at the bottom of the mountain. How do we know if they're hostile or not? Like, you can't see if they have weapons or if they have like a war party. You just have to kind of hear them out or talk to them, and at that point maybe it's too late. So I'm like, oh, that's so interesting. How are they going to resolve this fascinating? They've got superpowers.
Right. Ugh.
Sick.
Lame.
Cool. Glad you dodged having to come up with an interesting solution to that problem. So again, maybe the way where that show goes is cool. I think there might have been 2 seasons. I don't fucking know. But thinking about things that kind of broke my suspension of disbelief.
Totally.
I'm like, you could have just included that in the fucking paragraph.
Totally.
Anyway.
Desiree.
Clearly.
You've opened another great, amazing can of worms for us. What a fun conversation. I loved this email.
Yes.
And I really appreciate that she's reading along with us on these book clubs.
Yeah.
Desiree, I hope you jump into Heretics. It gets only weirder, but also a lot more fun.
Yeah.
So I hope you'll be reading the rest of the saga with us too. Thank you so much for your email and for sharing your thoughts and posing this question. What a fun one.
Indeed. Well, we're going to handle another question, but first we're going to take a quick break. Don't go anywhere. When we're back, we're going to talk about Jews in space.
Welcome back, folks. Let's continue digging into our mailbag and answering some more questions.
Yeah.
Up next, we have an email from Brody. And this is what Brody wrote. Quote, I've only collected up to God Emperor of Dune and have been very skeptical about Heretics and Chapter House. I, on one hand, absolutely love the series, but on the other, well, it's completely unfinished from what I hear. I hate the idea of being left dangling from a cliff forever. I also spoiled a bit about space Jews, and that alone makes me really nervous it'll get really anti-Semitic, and I don't want to ruin my perception of these books. Would you guys still recommend I stick through and read them? Or would God Emperor of Dune be a fine stopping point because I may not enjoy the last 2 as much? End quote.
Yeah. What a great question,
wow.
Brody. Something that I think a lot of people come up against for sure.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of a tough one to answer, but and listen, we're biased.
Very biased.
We've been talking about Dune for 4 years. We like it. We like the last 2 books.
Right.
But we'll lay out our thoughts on the pieces of your question, and you can do with them what you will.
Yeah, exactly. And to start, I quickly want to address what a good stopping point in the Dune saga might be. We've actually sort of chatted about this before across various episodes, but I think there are quite a number of natural stopping points in the Dune saga that will still give you a complete and satisfying story to some extent.
Yeah.
For example, you could literally just stop after the first book. You could read Dune, you could enjoy the rise of Paul Atreides as the Emperor and the Kwisatz Haderach, and then just allow yourself to imagine what his rule could be like based off of those writings from Irulan at the start of every chapter. That, in and of itself, could be a very satisfying experience, and you could walk away just fine.
Sure.
And I imagine a lot of people actually do exactly that.
Yeah.
The next natural stopping point in my mind is after Children of Dune. You've completed this arc of Paul Atreides. You've seen his journey across those 3 books, saw the ups and downs. You get this cohesive trilogy of a story that recounts this tragic history of House Atreides and the events of humanity. That, I think, is also a really fun stopping place because you kind of end with Leto, as we stated with Desiree's question, Leto becoming some sort of half-worm creature, hinting at this potential future, hinting at his 4,000-year rule to come.
Yeah, yeah.
And how this choice has saved humanity.
Right.
That is a perfectly great stopping point, I think. The next one is basically where Brody is saying that he might stop. God Emperor of Dune. You could read God Emperor of Dune, and in my mind, it's almost like this epilogue to the trilogy that enlightens you more about the Golden Path and the specifics about Leto's 3,500-year rule. And God Emperor of Dune continues to hint at what humanity's future might be, and ultimately ends with Leto's sacrifice, with Leto's death, and him securing the future of humanity, presumably, through Siona and Duncan and all the pieces at play.
Right. And explicitly between Children of Dune and God Emperor, right? He acknowledges, exactly. He's like, oh yeah, humanity would have been gone by now.
Right. would have been gone. I saved it 1,000 times over, and I continue to do so.
Yeah.
So I think that is also a really great stopping point because, sure, you don't have every answer to every question that's ever been posed in the Dune universe. Right. Not all threads have been closed, but you have enough to be like, this is satisfying. Leto did the work. He put in the hours, the many, many millions of hours to save humanity, and now humanity is saved, and we're good to go. We're Gucci.
And thank God animals are still animal-shaped, and there aren't any chairs.
Exactly. So I think those are three, in my mind, very natural stopping places. After the first book, after the trilogy, or after God Emperor of Dune, once you get a couple more answers about the Golden Path.
Yep.
All valid, and I wouldn't fault anyone for enjoying the story up to these points and then just walking away very satisfied.
Yeah, it's a lot to say. You have to read thousands of pages.
Yeah, exactly.
No one has to. You don't owe anything to anyone. And you're right. I think those are good stopping points.
Yeah. But, of course, there are more books.
There are.
And we do end on a cliffhanger, which we should address.
Yeah. So, naturally, we're not going to talk plot of Heretics in Chapter House.
Of course.
But this is something, Brody, that the Dune fandom has struggled with for decades. Literally since Chapter House was published and in the years following after Frank died. We will never get the finale that Frank planned. There is a lot to love about Heretics in Chapter House. They do have weird stuff in them, for sure. People saying they get weirder and hornier. Not wrong. There are chair dogs are a thing.
Yeah, right. Full stop.
But Frank does also continue to hone his craft as an author.
Yeah.
I find myself, as we are doing the Heretics Book Club right now, I find myself really appreciating some of the subtleties of his writing and his ability to kind of evoke certain feelings that I don't know he would have been capable of when he wrote the first Dune book.
Yeah.
And characters like Teg are like series highlights for me. I think I would really regret not having met Teg, just as a note.
Same, of course. I feel the same way. I've been pretty open about the fact that I'm not the biggest fan of Heretics in Chapter House for many of the reasons you've listed. I think in general, these books tend to illustrate some of the worst tendencies that Frank has as a storyteller. They're less cohesive than the original trilogy. They're more rambly, like God Emperor starts to be. And Frank really doubles down on some like downright weird ideas that begin to put, again, speaking of boundaries of a fictional universe, they start to push my own suspension of disbelief. And they start to like really push the boundaries of where I thought the Dune universe was. That's, of course, only how I feel about it. But having said that, I couldn't agree more. If you skip Heretics in Chapter House, you miss out on some of the best characters that Frank ever writes in the Dune saga. Miles Teg, you already mentioned. I also love Atreides so much.
Yeah, Atreides cool.
Shiana, such a fascinating character that juxtaposes Paul. These characters go on some incredible journeys in Heretics in Chapter House, as messy as it can be. And I couldn't agree more. You'd really be missing out on experiencing them if you skipped these stories.
Yeah. For what it's worth, I wanted to share kind of a perspective that a friend of mine wrote once.
I loved this.
Yeah. He's got such a way with words. This is one of my oldest friends, from middle school kind of thing. But he was sharing as part of a kind of blog he was keeping about the Kingkiller Chronicles, because the third book is still not out. And at the time that he started reading the first book, it was like rumored, but we weren't sure if we were going to get it. So he wrote this about that book. Quote, "There was a time when I refused to read or watch something if I knew it hadn't yet finished and the end's release date was uncertain." And then he continues that he does now start things, even in that situation, because he explains, quote, "A story can be like a friend you know for a small stretch of your life, whose company you enjoy and who you lose touch with over the years. Your time with them is valuable, even without a conclusion. And when your mind wanders, you can always imagine what they're up to these days." End quote.
Wow. Oh my goodness. That's making me emotional.
Yeah. It was a beautiful thought.
Wow.
Very, very well said, I think. But I think many of us have come to the point where we enjoy our time in Dune, whether or not there is a fun conclusion to it.
Yeah.
and it doesn't make the
Yes,
books any less
completely.
enjoyable because there is no thrilling conclusion.
Yeah.
Now, regarding the presence of Jewish folks in the last two books, or in the last book, I guess
It's only in Chapter House.
it's only in Chapter House, yeah.
Yeah.
We can't say too much, right? Because we haven't gotten there in our book club.
Right.
But the discussion of whether their inclusion is anti-Semitic is one that I was able to find Jewish voices on both sides of the debate, basically saying it is or it isn't. It does seem to be not clear-cut.
Right. Yeah, you did some great research here.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, so to be clear, neither of us are Jewish.
Yes.
So even if it were subtly, I don't know that I would notice being not Jewish myself.
Right.
But looking into it and trying to find Jewish voices talking about this, the last book and kind of how it felt to them, I found perspectives. There's one by Michael Weingrad, who wrote a piece called Jews of Dune, who argues that the Jews' inclusion is problematic and that a lot of their characteristics draw from anti-Semitic tropes. So these are literary tropes that Frank would have been exposed to, and he kind of like borrowed from them. I'm like, sure, okay. And then the other perspective I saw was David Kalman, who wrote the piece called, quote, What the Jews of Dune Meant to Me, end quote. And you can find those online, who responded in parts to Michael Weingrad's piece and perspective, but says in conclusion, quote, Chapter House's Jews were evidence that a future had room for my people, that our existence remained plausible amidst even the most fantastical changes, end quote. So I shared those two perspectives. One person of Jewish descent saying, yes, it's problematic, and one saying, no, it didn't bother me, and my interpretation is that I like seeing Jewish people in literature in the far future.
Yeah.
I think from the wording of your question, Brody, that you're going to be fine. I can't make any promises, of course. Like if you read Chapter House and it rubs you the wrong way, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to lead you into that experience. Some Jewish readers have been rubbed the wrong way by Frank's choices, but it also seems clear to me, looking online, that many have not. Many were not bothered by the way that the Jewish characters were handled in Chapter House.
Right.
And if anything, there does seem to be a lot of room for your interpretation with the text and you to have that kind of negotiation. Also, if it's worth anything, Abu and I will talk about Chapter House, and we will talk about those characters.
Yep.
And we will do our best to pick apart in what ways they're problematic and what ways they are not.
Absolutely.
We'll talk about it for sure. So if you want to do that on your own, if you want to read the book on your own, by all means. If you want to wait for us to do our book club, we will. Either way, I think you'll be fine.
Yeah.
Frank is problematic in a few ways at a few times. This never felt to me as overtly problematic as some of his other moments.
Agreed. It's been a couple years since I read Chapter House, so my memory is a little fuzzy, but I do not remember the Jewish characters in that book being as overtly problematic as some of the homophobic ideas or outdated gender views that creeped into God, Emperor of Dune.
Yeah,
I don't remember my like red flag radar going up as aggressively as I did when I was reading God, Emperor.
Yeah.
So I think there are certainly perspectives that are worth exploring there on the inclusion of the Jewish faith and Jewish people in this story that takes place like 40,000 years in the future.
Yeah.
But I don't think Frank is overtly saying anything problematic about them, and he might just inadvertently be dipping into some Jewish tropes that we see in storytelling. But we'll have to explore that much further once we get into Chapter House and actually get to those characters and stories.
Yeah, I also, reading the full piece by Michael Weingrad, I think there's room to push back a little bit on like Frank's intentions, and kind of Michael says some things like characterizes some of the characters' behaviors in a way that didn't feel like it was necessarily fully reinforceable with the text.
Yeah,
so
agreed.
I think it'll be a good conversation. I think there's some positives to take from all of it. Gosh, it's hard to talk about.
Again, there's chair dogs. I don't think the inclusion of the Jewish people is what's going to turn you off from Heretics in Chapter House. There are many other things that are fucking weird in those books. And I don't think that's the part of it you need to be too concerned about.
So hopefully that helps, Brody. Some perspective on it and an invitation. You can either read the books on your own. Of course, I think both of us agree you should. They're good.
Yeah.
Even without a fully satisfying conclusion, final book. But you can also wait for us to talk about it in our book club, which will probably happen next year.
That's right.
At some point.
That's right. Thank you for the great question, Brody. I'm sure that's something that's on a lot of folks' mind as they make their way through the Dune saga.
100%. Yeah.
Okay, next up, we have an email from Chris Albright about the Dune Awakening video game and the developer's choice to set it in an alternate timeline. Speaking of alternate timelines.
Yeah.
Quote, why do you think they made this choice? Yeah, I understand if they just tried to adapt the book as is, it could be really restrictive in a video game format. But the timeline of the Dune franchise spans over thousands of years. So many opportunities to tell a new story in that universe either long before or long after Paul. So why choose to tell a story where Paul never even existed? I don't have a problem with it. I just think it's a bold choice. End quote.
Yeah. Chris, great question. And also one that's, I think, front of mind for a lot of fans of Dune who saw the kind of press thing where they were talking about that alternative timeline.
Yeah.
So we're, happy to share our take on that.
Yeah.
I think we kind of agree with you, Chris. It's like, that's not a bad thing. It is bold, for sure.
Right. It's a bold take for sure. And I think on many levels, it is smart. Being sort of like the type A, logistically minded person that I am.
Yeah.
If I were making that video game, I would probably do the same.
Yeah.
Because I think alternate timeline dodges a lot of really messy questions that someone might have.
Totally.
Playing the video game, you'd get a lot of complaints of people being like, actually, like in the lore.
That's not. Yeah.
and like, that's just like, if I'm making a video game, that's like fucking annoying to deal with. Like, yes, I want to respect the lore, but I also just want to play around in this sandbox that Frank created.
Yeah.
And like, sure, man, in this alternate reality, there are like hover cars and shit, and they run on suspensors. Like, I'm not necessarily breaking the lore there because suspensors exist. We see things floating. The Baron floats around all the time.
Right.
And maybe in this video game, I want to create a vehicle that you can craft or upgrade to that you can hover around on. Like, that would be allowed in a setting where I'm saying this is an alternate timeline. I'm not stuck with exactly what happened in the events of the book, or even what the fallout of the books might be thousands of years later after they take place. I think it's a smart move ultimately.
Yeah. It's like, make a good game. Focus on making a fun,
game
enjoyable
first.
game. I don't want you to say like, oh shit, I think people would really love a suspensor bike to get around the desert.
Yeah.
But too bad we don't see any of those. Guess you're walking.
Right. Frank never wrote about a suspensor motorcycle.
Yeah. So instead you have to fucking walk, and going from siege to siege takes 3 months of real-time gameplay. Too bad. It's like, no, make a game that's fun. And if it takes just saying, hey, carte blanche, we're going to make the decision, alternative timeline, so that certain things might be a little different. Hell yeah. Sounds good.
Yeah. I agree.
I think we totally agree. There are a lot of untold stories in the Dune universe to explore.
Oh yeah.
So I don't really see a reason similar to what you were saying, Chris, I don't really see a reason to cling too closely to the kind of familiar years that we learned so much about from Frank. Brian Herbert, that's a message for you. We don't need you, Brian, to write a story about the 2 months that we didn't see in the first fucking book. Calm down.
Jesus
Paul of Dune
Christ.
is such a fucking weird book. So let's say Dune Awakening is a modern game with narrative elements that introduces a lot of people to play within the Dune universe. Excellent. I think this is a great starting point. I think this is a great litmus test to say, hey, look, the Dune universe is an IP within which you can make a pretty good game.
Yeah.
Then other game companies can come along and make good narrative games set in the Dune universe where you aren't maybe confined. It's a narrative game, but it's not confined, like the Force Awakens games, right? You're following Cal something. Cal, what's his name?
Cal Kestis.
Yeah.
Force Awakens is actually different. That's not canon anymore. But Jedi Fallen Order is what you're thinking of, which is canon. Yeah.
So for instance, what a great narrative game. But I think that game couldn't have happened if like Star Wars Battlefront didn't happen, and if some of those other like Star Wars modern IP games hadn't been made.
Oh yeah.
I don't think it would have gotten funding. So I'm like, yeah, let's get a good game out there. Let's all play it. Let's give feedback early, and let's help them fix it, and then it'll have great reviews and blah blah blah. You know, great.
Right. Totally. There's so many stories to tell. There's literally, like Chris said in the email, thousands of years of stories to tell within the Dune universe that can still adhere to the Prime canon. But I think especially for an MMO game like this, and especially as you're saying, as like the first foray into Dune video games, not counting the Westwood strategy games from the 90s,
yeah,
it's tough. And I think the smart thing to do is alternate timeline, because MMOs themselves aren't really like story-rich experiences with like incredible voice acting and motion capture, you know? Like it's not going to be something like The Last of Us, where we get this very tight, cohesive single-player experience. MMOs themselves tend to be sort of open and loose.
Yeah.
So I think you got to play it kind of fast and loose with the timeline also.
Yeah, and I think that's great. I mean, I think this is the sort of like sloppy, messy game where they get to try a bunch of ideas, see what's fun, see what Dune elements map well to gameplay experiences, and then later on, we can get the Hitman-style, mission-driven Tleilaxu assassination game where you have to like observe your opponent from a whatever, face morph into them, and then infiltrate the dinner banquet. Yeah, we can get that later on, but this is an opportunity to figure out the aesthetics of a game, a Dune universe game. Hell yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, I can't wait to get the Dune version of Cal Kestis in a decade or something, you know? Something that's in line, that's considered canon, that's Prime canon, expands the story in interesting and fascinating ways, crossover into other stuff. Like, we need that treatment to happen to the Dune universe as an IP in a fun and exciting way that sort of breaks outside the bounds of what Brian frankly has done with, and the Herbert estate has limited it to. And I think we're starting to see that slowly happen, which is exciting.
Yeah, I think so. So very, very, I think that's generally our take on it. I will say, I'm learning about game development right now. I made a game last year.
Yeah.
And I'm working on a couple of projects now.
Fun.
I will say the main character of one of the games I'm working on is a certain bouncy little desert critter. So, just putting that out there. So down the road, I will 100% be making games about the things I love. I will probably have to dodge some legal requirements. I will 100% be making things down the road. So if you're a huge fan of Dune, same. And I'm learning how to make games. So I'll be making, who knows? We'll see.
Hell yeah. So exciting. Ooh.
Yeah. And again, I'm at least working right now on, I'll have to figure out a way of showing you, people can hear you see it. Here's the character model.
Oh.
And that is a little leaf on the head. Leaf hat.
Yeah, with a little leaf on his head.
Yeah.
His tail is very erect. I wonder what he's looking at.
Listen.
It's like very.
Listen.
It's giving Pinocchio.
It's a T-pose.
But also dick.
It's a T-pose. You have to T-pose. Okay, it's fine.
Game dev stuff, you know?
Yeah.
Hashtag just game dev stuff.
Moving on from the erect tail of my undisclosed main character. Yeah. Listen, really appreciate the question, Chris. Always fun to talk about Awakening, and I'm so fucking stoked. When that game is live, that is going to be the time to be in our Discord, because we're going to, however we can. We're going
to be getting some groups together.
Yeah, for sure. With listeners, it'd be so much fun to go scavenging and fucking building bases together. The best. Okay, thank you, Chris. And up next, we have a really sweet email from Rick Harlow that left us blushing and kicking our feet. Quote, "The way you guys treat these books with clearly deep respect, but not reverence, is a bit of a revelation for me. The depth of your knowledge of the material is only matched by your ability to recognize when you're not familiar with some of it, and then do research to correct that inconsistency. This is a rare trait, and even more rare in podcasts. And I mentioned the lack of reverence as a big, big compliment. Frank was pretty explicit that he didn't want a cult around him. He had ridiculously strong convictions, but knew that even he was fallible. We have to examine such iconic figures and their backgrounds faithfully and honestly. End quote.
Hear, hear.
Dude, I'm so tired of overtly confident guys being podcast hosts, just like fucking asserting.
Oh my God.
Without any work or research.
Ugh.
We appreciate it, Rick. We do take all of that very seriously. I mean, for sure. And Rick does go on to say how he appreciates the kind of delicate but direct conversations we had about Frank's problematic ideas about gender and sexuality, especially in God, Emperor of Dune. And
yeah, we did our best.
We did our best. Listen, and we appreciate the recognition too, seriously, because this podcast would be so much easier if we just sidestep some of those conversations with like, ha, that's fucking weird. Moving on. Then
let me shotgun this beer,
beer. Anyway, Duncan goes on to fuck some more. Woo!
Yeah,
Duncan. You know,
fuck those hoes.
Yeah, we could do that.
Yeah, is that the type of podcast you want? If that would make us more money, I'll pivot. I will hard pivot. If that will make us like 10x the money.
You know, yeah. Maybe we launch a slightly separate podcast and we just
this ultra bro-y Dune podcast.
Yeah. It would be so much easier to avoid those conversations, but we think it's important. And I'll also say we are fallible. We don't always have those conversations without misstepping here or there, like, you know, saying something we don't quite mean or misrepresenting something. You know, we've messed up in the past when we've talked about these things.
Yeah.
We try our best. We take it very, very seriously, but we also are a little limited. We have to rely on our experiences, our perspectives, and the research that we have time to conduct, basically, on our weekly production schedule.
Right.
I'll say personally, like there are a couple of times when we had a script that we were working on talking about like some of the gender stuff or the sexuality stuff. And I really desperately wanted to like take a year sabbatical and just get like a doctorate quickly in like gender and sexuality studies and like really, or get like a very well-known expert on it and, you know, have a long, great interview and blah, blah, blah. And there just isn't enough time for you and me, this 2-person team, putting together this weekly podcast. Yeah. So we do our best because at the end of the day, I think it's really, really important to have the conversations, to be critical of the books that we're reading and the perspectives that Frank shares. It's important to disagree sometimes. You know, Abu, you and I, like, we don't always agree 100% on what we're talking about. And I think all of that is way more important than brushing over them, that for people who've read these books, that might have been the thing that hurt them or made them uncomfortable or really got in the way of them enjoying this great book series that we love. Let's talk about that and let's address the things that we think are wrong, and let's look at the different perspectives that might help us understand the context. I think all of that is very much one of our prime goals in production.
Definitely. It's something we've tried to make sure is part of the DNA of this show.
Yeah.
And something that we're quite proud of as well. I also wanted to call out in particular from Rick's email, the point about treating something you love with respect, but not reverence. I loved the way Rick put that in the email. Because as he says, it's an idea that Frank himself would champion.
Right.
And I think it's a great reminder to all of us who are fans or who participate in fandoms like Dune, like Star Wars, like anime, like Lord of the Rings. We love those things, but loving something is not the same thing as worshiping it.
Right.
And to treat the work that creators put into those universes with respect but not reverence, I think, is something that we've certainly tried to do on this show.
Yeah.
Frank put words to pages. He created universes. He told incredible stories. And we respect that greatly. It means so much to us personally. But it's not holy, and it's not infallible. And it is worthy of dissection and discussion and analysis and critique. And I think that applies to consuming any art that means the world to you. And it's tough, to be fair. It can become a fine line when you love something so much, when it is so personally meaningful to you. It can be tough to distance yourself enough to be able to critique it or say, you know what, this one, not a home run. Acolyte, not a great Star Wars story. But there were things I respected and loved about it too. And I think that's always a tough approach to take with anything that means so much to you, especially if you grew up with it.
Yeah, also like loving a work of art and it meaning a lot to you, and then someone saying, I don't like that for this reason, and being able to listen to that and respect their perspective.
Yeah, not a personal attack.
It's not a personal attack.
You.
And I've definitely felt at times like, you know, either you'll say something or we'll get a comment or whatever, and I'll like feel like I was personally jabbed at. And it's so weird.
Same, all the time.
It's so strange, but like that's how it is. Like you just you love something and it kind of works its way into your heart, and then when someone critiques it, it feels like they're critiquing you.
Oh, it does.
So anyway, you know, we are two bros making a podcast at the end of the day. But
just shotgunning.
It's been a long time since I shotgunned a beer. Have you ever shotgunned a beer?
I've literally never shotgunned a beer in my life, and I don't want to.
All right, maybe I'll make you do that just for the reception. I'll make you shotgun a beer. Yeah, but we're, you know, at the end of the day, we take it all very seriously, and we appreciate when people notice, and
yes,
and it means the world to us when people say nice things to us. Because it's really hard.
It does.
It's really a lot of work.
Yeah, thank you, Rakes, so much for that great reminder to all of us, and for the really heartwarming email. It certainly made my day when I read it.
Yeah, and also I say all of this too because I think we sometimes get people who are like, hey, I just like how much fun you have and blah, blah, blah. And maybe there is a universe in which we just have more fun and we don't do as much of the like serious, heartfelt conversations. But I do think it's important that there's space for both sides of the coin.
Yeah.
And for any of you who prefer our more jovial, lighthearted chatter to our more heartfelt stuff, I just hope it makes sense why we take it as seriously as we do, even if it's not your favorite type of art content.
Right. And to the people that don't like how much we cuss and laugh,
fuck off.
Fuck off. We're having a good time.
What up? Shit.
Let us have fun.
Yeah.
This is supposed to be fun.
It's a lot of work. We have to keep laughing or else, you know, it wouldn't have made it 4 years.
Truly.
Well, listen, next up we have a message from Faiz Ali, and this is a little bit of a bonus because we don't really have much to say in regards to it.
Yeah, there's no question
here.
It's cute.
But this was back in February of 2023. So we are now at like a year and a half since Faiz sent this email to us. Wrote us this incredibly thoughtful email. Very, very nice. And included a Gom Jabbar podcast poem.
Oh my God.
Which honestly was so touching. So we wanted to share the poem here. Faiz said it would be okay. So here we go. This is a poem written by Faiz Ali. From the sands of Arrakis, a voice is heard. A podcast that speaks truth without any word. Gom Jabbar, it's called. A beacon of light. In the world of Dune, it shines ever so bright. Its hosts are like Fremen, wise and well-versed. Their knowledge of the franchise leaves none unrehearsed. With each episode, they weave a tapestry of lore that enriches the mind and leaves us wanting more. The themes they discuss, from power to fate, are explored with a depth that few can replicate. Their analysis, like spice, adds flavor to the tale, making the Dune universe all the more hail. Oh, how they bring to life each character's plight, from Paul to Jessica, and all in their sight. Their voices, like wind, carry us through the sand to a world of intrigue, so vibrant and grand. With each new episode, the podcast evolves. Like a sandworm, it grows, and our passion resolves. Gom Jabbar, it's called, and we all know why. For in the world of podcasts, it reigns ever high.
Snaps! Snaps!
What a super nice poem.
Wow.
Oh, lovely. Oh, that's so sweet.
That is incredibly sweet.
Fies.
Never in 1,000 years would I imagine someone would write a poem about this.
That was very sweet. Thank you, Fies. And sorry about the 18 months it took us to appreciate the work you put into it.
Yeah.
Oh, very fun.
Incredible. Thank you so much for sharing that. Okay, Leo. Enough patting ourselves on the back. Let's get back to fucking work.
Being tough.
Being tough. This is a tough episode. Tough people only.
Muad'Dib.
Let's end today's mailbag on a fun off-topic question. We like to end these mailbags on something a little less Dune related.
Yeah. Let's do it.
We got a Discord message from Moose Hunter 11B.
Okay.
Asking us about Lord of the Rings. Quote, with the Rings of Power and now the Rohan anime series releasing in the fall, what are your thoughts of Middle-earth being brought into the anime world? Personally, I've grown to love anime storytelling, with Naruto being my favorite, and think that this new addition to Lord of the Rings media is going to be amazing. And lastly, did you watch Rings of Power, and if so, what did you think of it? I enjoyed a lot of it, but hated 90% of the dialogue. It felt dry and out of place for a Tolkien story, on top of some of the egregious lore breaks in the series. I was, however, able to overlook some of the lore mishaps and just viewed it more as a myth or legend of some of the characters. End quote.
Yeah, great question overall. I think we could knock this out in just like 2 or 3 seconds, which is to say, we think everything should be anime. We think it should be more anime.
All right, Don and Dustin, let's wrap up this episode.
Thanks everyone for listening. No, we're both huge fans of anime, and it's been very exciting to see animation as a medium grow in these last few decades, particularly in the West.
Yeah.
Like, animation in the West is frankly behind. Like, we have Pixar.
For sure.
We have DreamWorks. We have some really excellent works happening. But you look at how evolved the art form is in Japan, for instance, and even like webcomics in Korea, handling just like the most incredible stories.
Mm-hmm.
We are only now seeing the broader perspective of animation in the West, breaking away from the stigma of like cartoons are for kids.
Yep.
And seeing that storytelling medium get to the place where it's been in Japan for a long time. We've seen recently more mature and adult stories like Blue-Eyed Samurai.
Oh,
fucking incredible.
Every frame of that show is a painting. I want to print it out and hang it up on the wall.
It's unreal. Yeah. And even the Scavenger's Reign, right? Excellent stories that aren't the same kind of tried and true Family Guy, Futurama, South Park thing that's dominated American television, cartoon, animated television, or even like Looney Tunes, which definitely is excellent.
Yeah.
I still think Tom and Jerry fucking slaps, but it's not the same evolved art, storytelling art form that it is now becoming with things like these stories.
Yeah.
And this is what Japanese animation's been doing for decades. Like Evangelion
oh my God,
is fucking nuts. Like, this is Dune level weird.
Yes.
Right?
Evangelion made me feel things that I didn't know I could feel. In like a way that actually like really made me kind of like sad, and I don't know. It's such a difficult show in the best way possible to watch.
As an art form. It's just like, it's very advanced storytelling. And then also there's shows like Vinland Saga, right? Which I think you recently watched, right?
Yeah, I watched season 1 and 2 recently.
Yeah. And like that is something that the only storytelling I see in the US that's like that are these like HBO live action shows that are super gritty and take themselves super seriously. Like, yeah, but you can animate that. You don't have to do that live action. That's also why I a little bit cringe when anime is so closely linked with shows like Naruto and Bleach and, the sort of like shonen shows.
Yeah.
I think if people say, how do we imagine a Lord of the Rings anime is going to go? It's not necessarily Gimli being like, kawaii ne, or Legolas going through a transformation sequence and coming out all pretty. It could just be what Peter Jackson made, but animated instead of filmed, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you've kind of touched on a point, like, man, I could do like a whole episode on anime and its history, but like anime coming to the West, the way it was like initially translated to the West, it was like meant for teenage boys, right? Like that was kind of the inflection point. It was like, we need to sell this stuff to teenage boys. And that's where we get our Bleaches and our Narutos and our Dragon Ball Zs. And that's not a bad thing. Those are iconic shows that are deeply meaningful to me, and I grew up with them. Many of us grew up with them in the 90s, late 80s and 90s. But now anime in the West and animation in general as a medium has had a tough time like breaking away. Like Western animation has had a tough time breaking away from the kids' table because of how dominant Pixar has been.
Right.
And anime in the West, again, not speaking about Japanese anime, but what ends up being translated and coming over to America, that has now had a tough time and has spent decades breaking away from its own marketing of teenage boy stuff.
Kind of pigeonholed
and
itself
action
accidentally.
And shonen and punching and we're seeing that evolve in really interesting and fun ways. I mean, Vinland Saga you brought up earlier is not a show about Vikings fighting. There's plenty of Vikings, there's plenty of fighting. But what it is a show that is deeply anti-war. Yeah. And it's a show that explores how war and bloodshed is an endless cycle, and that breaking it is actually such an act of bravery. And that is something that like you can't pitch to a teenage boy in 1993. No. I myself, as a kid in like 1999, would have been like, this is fucking boring. I'm gonna go back to watching Vegeta punch people.
Yeah.
So I think we are kind of living in a really exciting time if you're an anime fan, and especially if you're now an adult anime fan who grew up with it, because we are seeing things like mainstream properties, Cyberpunk, Blade Runner, Lord of the Rings, embrace animation in a way where they're realizing it doesn't have to fall into those anime tropes that were so heavily marketed toward, frankly, like horny teenage boys.
Right.
And I'm very much looking forward to the Rohan anime. I think it's called The War of Rohirrim. And I really do hope that it leans into some of the strengths of the medium, right? There's no point in making an anime that could just be filmable in real life. Like, anime can get weird and push the limits of visual storytelling in a way that would either fall flat in live action or would be incredibly weird in live action or just simply is impossible in live action. You cannot film Gurren Lagann in live action. If you were to try to, you'd be absolutely fucked.
Oh my gosh, true.
And it simply wouldn't translate in any way that has even 10% of the impact that the Gurren Lagann anime itself does. And so I hope that the War of the Rohirrim, I'm sure it'll be beautiful. Some of the screenshots that have been released of it so far inspired confidence, but I do hope that they like really lean into the flexibility that animation gives you that live action maybe doesn't.
Yeah.
And I think that's the best way to approach it. If you're going to take your property and turn it into anime or animation, go the Star Wars Visions route. Fuck the canon, fuck what is possible, fuck what is real or even makes sense, and lean in.
Yeah.
Lean into what the animation allows you to do, visually and from a storytelling perspective.
Yeah. I also, I think for anybody who thinks that anime is still just, action and fighting and stuff like that.
Oh boy.
Go look up Monster by Naoki Urasawa. I think you can watch it on Netflix. I think you can watch it on, some mainstream platforms. Called Monster.
Yeah.
And it's phenomenal. I mean, again, it makes a lot of people's, top 10 lists of all time. It's about a neurosurgeon who gets wrapped up in some, I don't know how to exactly pitch this story without spoiling things, but it's Germany, the wall just fell. They're still struggling to reunify. It's heavy trauma. But I also think this was a show from 2004. Doesn't feel right, but maybe. Yeah, because it's original run was 1994 was when the manga was coming out. So in the 90s. I think that today anime has been changed by people like Miyazaki. The medium has changed.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't help but think about the fact that Jujutsu Kaisen in their second season, each episode was $150,000, $200,000 to fund each episode.
Wow.
And then you have Disney out here putting tens of millions of dollars into live action adaptations of Moana, which was like so recent. What are you doing? That movie's still relevant. I don't know. Like, instead of that, make some really great animated original films based on really beautiful writing, and it will not disappoint people. You don't need Kevin Hart in every fucking animated film to like get people to sit down and watch it, you know?
You particularly don't need Kevin Hart in Borderlands. Jesus fuck.
No. And Borderlands is a great example of like, they had a franchise with really excellent writing, vivid storytelling, excellent characters, a really vibrant thing with a huge fan base. And then they got their little grubby executive hands on it and created one of the biggest flops in the last decade.
Yeah. You know what would have been great? A Borderlands anime.
Would have been so fucking good.
You know what is great? A Suicide Squad anime right now.
On Max, right?
About Harley Quinn. An isekai about Harley Quinn. Like, yeah, you can take these properties and reinterpret them. I will say, I know we're getting deep into anime. You brought up Naoki Urasawa. And if someone's, I haven't heard of Monster, but I do want to check it out because I just finished watching Pluto.
Oh, I haven't watched Pluto yet.
And if you're like, 2004, 1990s, maybe it'll be too old fashioned for me. If you want something more modern by Naoki Urasawa, watch Pluto on Netflix.
Is Pluto good?
It is incredible. The first episode made me cry so much. And I was just like, what am I watching?
Yeah.
I went into it basically knowing nothing about it, just cold. Yeah. All I knew about it is that people were raving about Pluto. And I have no attachment to Astro Boy, but apparently it's Naoki Urasawa's reinterpretation of Astro Boy, of a certain arc in the Astro Boy series. It's incredible. It's like a neo-noir, very dark, very moody, very cool sci-fi murder mystery show. And it truly goes places about like human autonomy and artificial intelligence and human rights. And
wow, cool.
Incredible stuff. It's a huge allegory for like for Desert Storm and the invasion of like Iraq. And
wow, interesting.
It's an incredible show, and it's a more modern work from Naoki Urasawa. So alongside Monster, I can recommend that as well if you're interested, folks.
It's funny because I saw Pluto on my Netflix homepage, and I was like, oh, this is him. This is Urasawa for sure. Yeah. Without even having to see any credits because it's such a distinct animation style. Yeah. And I remember downloading, this was back in the day of LimeWire. I downloaded all of Monster as like AVI files.
Hell yeah, let's go.
And because I was like, I want to try an anime that's not for teenage boys. And it changed my life forever. So anyway, all of this to say, anime is excellent. And it's a great storytelling medium. Rings of Power, as I understand it, I didn't see it, failed because its dialogue and script wasn't great and whatever.
Yeah, I guess Moose Hunter asked about Rings of Power. You didn't watch it. I did watch Rings of Power season 1. I was very excited about it. I think I kind of agreed with Moose Hunter is where I landed. A lot of this plot lines, like, I don't know, I couldn't even tell you what happened in Rings of Power. It was just kind of like very mid. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think they did a good job translating Peter Jackson's world into a TV show. I don't know where the fuck they blew all that budget on. It was $1 billion season, but
what the fuck, really?
Yeah, it's the most expensive TV show ever made in history. I think billion, like including the huge marketing budget and stuff too.
Good Lord, and that includes the fucking dragon that they put on the Empire State Building.
Well, you're thinking of Game of Thrones.
Yeah, but I'm saying like Game of Thrones publicity didn't cost a bill.
Like did that, and still didn't cost as much. Yeah, Rings of Power. I will certainly be watching season 2. Season 2 is about to come out at the end of the month. I'm looking forward to season 2. I will take any opportunity to jump back into Tolkien's world. It's been a pretty mid journey so far. I agree the writing is like sort of stilted and awkward. It captures some of the heart and essence of Peter Jackson's adaptation, but I think it falls flat in many ways. I like some of the storylines. I love what's happening on Numenor a lot. I'm a bit of a Numenor simp, notoriously, but the other storylines aren't really landing for me. We'll see what happens in season 2.
Yeah. So yeah, I think we're aligned. More of these IPs is good. We enjoy people seeing them. I don't need whatever Cars 5 or whatever the fuck Pixar is working on. I'd much rather kind of original stories, and because The Lord of the Rings has this like insane backlog of like stories that exist in the Silmarillion, and because Dune has all of the time, it's like let's get more stories, more original stories, and animate them. Why the fuck not?
Let's do it.
You can get crazy with animation. So cool.
Yeah. Give Naoki Urasawa free reins to do whatever the fuck he wants in the Dune universe.
He would do such a good...
Imagine!
He would do such a good, like, smuggler-based story on Arrakis.
Yeah.
And, like, the intrigue
imagine.
and the... Oh, absolutely.
Someday. We can dream.
Well,
Okay.
That's our mailbag.
That's the mailbag, folks.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your incredible questions and for your deeply heartfelt emails, some of which we got to share today and gush about. They mean the world to us, and we appreciate you so much.
Indeed we do. Now, before we let you go, dear listener, we want to remind you some ways to support the show and keep in touch with us.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the two best ways is, one, to become a patron over at patreon.com/GomJabar, or to get yourself some Dune-themed swag from our merch store, gomjabarshop.com. Those links are in our show notes. And I also will, again, double plug the Patreon, because as like Dune Awakening comes out and as the Sisterhood show comes out, there's going to be a lot of chatter on the Discord, which you have access to if you're a Dune patron. So if you like what we do here, you can become a supporter for a couple bucks a month, cost of a spiced coffee every month, and be a part of our fun little community on Discord.
That's right. And of course, this mailbag wouldn't have come together if y'all hadn't emailed us and pinged us on Discord. So do more of that. We love to hear from you. GomJabarPodcast@gmail.com is the place. Send your questions, send your thoughts, send your observations, send cute pictures of your pets. My God, our inbox is full of just the cutest critters. All of that. Again, GomJabarPodcast@gmail.com is the place. And once again, if your question didn't make it in today's episode, we do these mailbags often throughout the year. And maybe we'll catch you on the next one. So keep sending them.
Did you see the email? Someone shared their cat named Duncan Idaho.
Oh.
Who had the balancing issue that some cats have. So just will have like periods of not being able to like stay upright very well. And so very wobbly.
Oh,
so they were like
so
walking without rhythm. He walks without rhythm all the time.
Hell yeah.
I was like, this is the cute. And they sent a little video of Duncan like scrabbling, and I was like
stumbling around,
and I was thinking of fucking Clumsy Duncan. I was like, oh my God, it's Clumsy Duncan. It's so good. Yeah,
so good.
The pet pictures are always appreciated.
More of that.
Well, friends, there is no real ending. It's just the place where you stop the recording. But this podcast is always one step beyond logic, so help spread the word of Muad'Dib and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And be sure to check out the other shows on the Lore Party Podcast Network on loreparty.com. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at @lore_party. We're also on TikTok at Gomjabar Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, whoever controls the podcast controls the universe. We'll see you on the Golden Path.